In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world still sleeps and the morning mist clings to ancient oak trees, two figures walked hand in hand across the sacred grounds of Althorpe Estate. The woman beside him had never met the person they were about to visit, yet she carried flowers chosen with the same careful thought as a daughter might select for her mother. Prince Harry's grip tightened around his wife's fingers as they approached the small island in the middle of the lake, where his mother, Princess Diana, had found her final rest 26 years earlier. This wasn't just another royal visit or a photo opportunity for the press. This was Meghan Markle's first time standing before the grave of the woman whose shadow had shaped her husband's entire life, whose legacy had both blessed and haunted the man she loved. As the early morning light filtered through the trees, casting dancing shadows on the water that surrounded Diana's final resting place, Meghan would finally understand why Harry spoke of his mother not as a memory, but as a presence that continued to guide every decision he made. The weight of this moment stretched far beyond personal grief. It represented the meeting of two women separated by death, but connected by an unbreakable bond of love for the same man. One had given him life, the other had given him hope for the future. As they stood together on the bridge leading to the island, Harry realized this visit would change everything about how he carried his mother's memory forward, and how Meghan would finally comprehend the true depth of the responsibility that came with loving a son who had never stopped missing his mother. The conversation that would lead to one of the most emotionally significant moments of their relationship began on an ordinary Tuesday evening in their Frogmore Cottage home. Harry sat in his favorite armchair, the one positioned perfectly to catch the last rays of sunlight through the tall windows, reading through old letters his mother had written to him during his school years. These letters, preserved carefully in a wooden box that had belonged to Diana herself, were among his most treasured possessions. Meghan noticed the familiar, distant look in his eyes, the same expression that appeared whenever memories of his mother surfaced. She had learned to recognize these moments over the years of their relationship, understanding that while Harry had found peace with many aspects of his past, his connection to Diana remained raw and immediate. Unlike many people who spoke of deceased loved ones in past tense, Harry spoke of his mother as if she might walk through the door at any moment. The evening had started like many others, with Harry sharing stories about Diana that Meghan had never heard before. Tonight, he told her about the time his mother had surprised him at Eton by arriving unannounced with his favorite chocolate cake, hidden in a picnic basket. She had convinced the headmaster to let them have an impromptu afternoon tea in the school gardens, where she spent hours listening to Harry talk about his classes, his friends, and his dreams for the future. She had this way of making everything feel possible, Harry said, his voice carrying the particular softness it always held when speaking about Diana. Even when I was struggling with school or feeling overwhelmed by everything that came with being royal, she would remind me that I was just Harry to her. Not a prince, not a future king's brother, just her youngest son who happened to love football and chocolate biscuits more than anything else in the world. Meghan had heard hundreds of these stories over the years, each one painting a picture of a woman who had been determined to give her sons as normal a childhood as possible despite their extraordinary circumstances. She understood that Diana had been more than just Harry's mother. She had been his anchor, his confidant, and his greatest source of strength during the most formative years of his life. As Harry continued reading through the letters, Meghan found herself studying his face in the lamplight. She could see the boy he must have been in the way his eyes lit up at certain passages, the way he smiled unconsciously when reading about inside jokes he had shared with his mother. These moments of connection with Diana were sacred to him, and Meghan had learned early in their relationship to give him space to experience them fully. But tonight felt different somehow. There was an underlying sadness in Harry's demeanor that Meghan couldn't ignore. When he finished reading and carefully returned the letters to their box, she noticed his hands trembling slightly. This wasn't the peaceful contentment that usually followed his reminiscences about Diana. This was something deeper, more complex. "What's weighing on your mind?" Meghan asked gently, moving to sit on the arm of his chair. She had learned that direct questions often worked better with Harry than trying to guess what he was thinking. His natural tendency to protect others from his emotional burdens meant he would often deflect or minimize his feelings unless specifically asked to share them. Harry was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the carved edges of the wooden box. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking about how much she would have loved you," he said. "How much she would have loved to see us together, to meet Archie, to be part of our family. Sometimes the reality that she'll never get to know you, never get to hold our children, feels overwhelming." The raw honesty of his admission hung in the air between them. Meghan had always known that Harry's grief for his mother was complicated by all the milestones Diana would never witness, all the moments they would never share. But hearing him articulate it so clearly brought tears to her eyes. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become their silent language of support. "Tell me about where she rests," Meghan said softly. In all their conversations about Diana, Harry had rarely spoken about her burial place or his visits there. She knew it was at Althorpe, the Spencer family estate, but beyond that, she had never pressed for details. Some aspects of his grief were too personal, too sacred to intrude upon. Harry's entire body seemed to relax at the question, as if he had been waiting for her to ask. "It's the most peaceful place on earth," he began, his voice taking on a reverent quality. "She's buried on a small island in the middle of a lake, surrounded by ancient trees and flowers that bloom year-round. The only way to reach her is by walking across a small bridge, and there's something symbolic about that journey across the water." He described how Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, had chosen the location specifically because it would provide privacy and protection from the public attention that had followed Diana throughout her life. The island was accessible only to family members, ensuring that her final resting place would remain a sanctuary rather than a tourist destination. "I haven't been there since we got married," Harry admitted, and Meghan could hear the guilt in his voice. "I used to go regularly, especially on difficult days or before big decisions. I would sit by the water and talk to her, tell her about everything that was happening in my life. It always helped me feel connected to her, like she was still guiding me somehow." Meghan understood immediately why he hadn't returned since their wedding. Their marriage had marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that had ultimately led to their decision to step back from royal duties and build a life outside the traditional expectations placed upon them. For Harry, visiting Diana's grave while navigating such a significant transition might have felt too emotionally complex to handle. "Would you like to visit her together?" Meghan asked, the words leaving her lips before she had fully processed the thought. But as soon as she said it, she knew it felt right. "I would be honored to finally meet her, to pay my respects to the woman who raised the man I love." Harry turned to look at her with an expression of surprise mixed with deep emotion. The idea of sharing that sacred space with Meghan had never occurred to him, perhaps because it had always been his private refuge, his solitary place of communion with his mother's memory. But hearing Meghan offer to accompany him awakened something in his heart that he hadn't expected. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. "It's not an easy visit emotionally. I always leave feeling simultaneously comforted and heartbroken. There's something about standing at her grave that makes her absence feel both more peaceful and more final." Meghan nodded without hesitation. She had spent years hearing about Diana, seeing her influence in every aspect of Harry's character, understanding how her love had shaped him into the man he had become. The opportunity to visit Diana's resting place wasn't just about supporting Harry. It was about finally having the chance to express her own gratitude to the woman whose son had changed her life completely. "I think it's time," Meghan said, squeezing his hand. "I've been part of your life for years now, but I've never had the chance to properly introduce myself to your mother. I want her to know that someone is taking care of her son, that he's found happiness and love." The conversation that followed lasted well into the night, with Harry sharing details about the burial site that he had never told anyone. He described the memorial garden that surrounded the island, the specific flowers that bloomed there during different seasons, the bench where he liked to sit when the weather was good. He told her about the memorial temple on the estate, where visitors could leave flowers and messages for Diana. As they talked, Meghan began to understand that this visit would be significant not just for Harry, but for their relationship as well. It would represent a formal integration of Diana's memory into their shared life together, an acknowledgement that she was not just Harry's mother, but would always be part of their family story. They decided to plan the visit for the following weekend, allowing enough time to coordinate with Earl Spencer and ensure they would have complete privacy. Harry explained that his uncle was always accommodating when it came to family visits, understanding the emotional importance of these pilgrimages to Diana's grave. The decision made, Harry seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time since their marriage, he would not be visiting his mother alone. He would have Meghan beside him, bridging the gap between his past and his future in a way that felt both natural and profound. As they prepared for bed that night, Meghan found herself thinking about the woman she would finally meet in a few days. She wondered what Diana would think of the choices Harry had made, whether she would approve of their decision to step back from royal life, whether she would understand the love that had motivated those choices. In the darkness of their bedroom, as Harry slept peacefully beside her for the first time in weeks, Meghan whispered a silent promise to the woman who had given birth to the man she loved. She promised to honor Diana's memory, to protect Harry's heart the way Diana would have wanted, and to ensure that their children would grow up knowing the grandmother who would have adored them beyond measure. The visit to Althorpe was still days away, but already Meghan could feel its significance settling into her heart. This would be more than a trip to a grave. It would be a sacred ceremony of introduction, love, and promise that would change how she understood her place in Harry's story forever. The days leading up to their visit to Althorpe were filled with an unusual mix of anticipation and careful preparation that reminded Meghan of the feeling before a first date, except infinitely more significant. Harry had called his uncle, Earl Spencer, the morning after their conversation, and the warmth in Charles Spencer's voice when he heard about Meghan's desire to visit was evident even through the phone speaker. "She's always welcome at Althorpe," Earl Spencer had said simply. "Diana would have wanted her family to feel at home here, and Meghan is certainly family now." The straightforward acceptance in his words had brought tears to Meghan's eyes, reminding her once again of how Diana's relatives had consistently embraced her with open arms, treating her not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. Harry spent considerable time over the next few days sharing more detailed stories about his previous visits to Althorpe, helping Meghan understand what to expect both practically and emotionally. He told her about the long drive through the countryside, past rolling hills and small villages that seemed frozen in time, leading to the grand estate that had been the Spencer family home for over 5 centuries. "The house itself is magnificent," Harry explained as they sat together in their garden one afternoon, Archie playing nearby while they talked. "It's one of those places that immediately makes you feel the weight of history. But it's not intimidating in the way some grand estates can be. There's something welcoming about it, something that reflects the warmth that was always part of my mother's character." He described the long driveway lined with ancient oak trees, the impressive facade of the house with its classical architecture, and the extensive grounds that stretched as far as the eye could see. But his voice took on a different quality when he began talking about the specific area where Diana was buried, the words becoming softer and more reverent. "The memorial garden is separate from the main house," he continued. "You walk through this beautiful wooded area, following a path that was specifically designed to create a sense of journey and reflection. Every step closer to the island feels meaningful, like you're transitioning from the everyday world into something sacred." Meghan listened intently, trying to picture the place Harry described, while simultaneously preparing herself for the emotional intensity of the experience. She had never visited the grave of anyone particularly close to her, and she was acutely aware that this would be unlike any cemetery visit she had ever made. This was Princess Diana, a woman whose life and death had affected millions of people around the world. But more importantly, this was Harry's mother. The question of what to bring occupied much of Meghan's thoughts during these preparatory days. Harry mentioned that he always brought flowers, usually white roses or lilies, Diana's favorites. But Meghan wanted to choose something more personal, something that would represent her own relationship with Diana's memory and legacy. She found herself drawn to a combination of white roses and forget-me-nots, the latter being flowers that Diana had loved for their simple beauty and symbolic meaning. The forget-me-nots seemed particularly appropriate for Meghan's first visit, representing both remembrance and the promise that Diana's influence would never be forgotten in their family. Harry watched Meghan's careful consideration of every detail with a mixture of love and admiration. He had never shared this experience with anyone before, and seeing how thoughtfully she was approaching it reminded him once again why he had fallen in love with her. Meghan's instinct to honor important moments with careful attention and genuine respect was one of the qualities that made her so special. The night before their visit, they had a quiet dinner at home, both of them feeling the weight of anticipation for the next day. Harry seemed more reflective than usual, occasionally falling into comfortable silences that Meghan had learned to appreciate rather than fill with unnecessary conversation. She could sense that he was mentally preparing himself for the emotional journey ahead. "I keep wondering what she would think about everything that's happened," Harry said as they finished their meal. "About our decision to step back, about living here in California, about all the changes we've made. I know she would support our choices because she always wanted William and me to be happy, but I sometimes wish I could hear her voice telling me we're doing the right thing." Meghan reached across the table to take his hand, understanding the deeper current of uncertainty beneath his words. Harry's decision to step back from royal duties had been motivated by love and a desire to protect his family, but it had also meant walking away from the life his mother had prepared him for, the institutions she had tried to modernize from within. "From everything you've told me about her," Meghan said carefully, "it sounds like she would understand that love sometimes requires difficult choices. She made difficult choices too, didn't she? She chose authenticity over convention, chose to follow her heart even when it was complicated." Harry nodded, remembering his mother's own struggles with the constraints of royal life, her determination to raise her sons with awareness of the real world beyond palace walls, her willingness to challenge traditions that she felt no longer served their purpose. In many ways, his and Meghan's journey echoed some of the same themes that had defined Diana's later years. They went to bed early that night, both wanting to be well-rested for the emotional day ahead. But sleep proved elusive for both of them. Harry lay awake, thinking about all the visits he had made to his mother's grave over the years, remembering specific conversations he had had with her there, moments of grief and moments of peace that had shaped his healing process. Meghan found herself thinking about motherhood, about the fierce protectiveness she felt for Archie, and how Diana must have felt that same intensity for Harry and William. She imagined Diana's worry about her sons' futures, her hopes for their happiness, her desire to shield them from the harsh realities of public life, while still preparing them to serve others. Morning came gray and misty, the kind of English weather that seemed appropriate for such a solemn occasion. Harry woke early and spent time alone in their garden, gathering his thoughts and emotions before they began the journey. When Meghan joined him outside, carrying 2 cups of tea and the carefully chosen flowers, he was ready. The drive to Althorpe took just over 2 hours, winding through countryside that gradually became more rural and peaceful. They talked intermittently during the journey, but for the most part, they traveled in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. As they approached the estate, Harry pointed out landmarks he remembered from childhood visits when Diana was still alive. The local pub where they had sometimes stopped for lunch, the small church where several Spencer ancestors were buried, the village green where Diana had played as a child. These details helped Meghan understand that they weren't just visiting a grave. They were entering the landscape of Diana's childhood, the place where her character had been formed. Earl Spencer met them at the main house, embracing both Harry and Meghan with genuine warmth before offering them tea and a chance to refresh themselves before walking to the memorial garden. The interior of Althorpe was every bit as magnificent as Harry had described, filled with portraits and artifacts that spoke to centuries of family history. She loved this place, Earl Spencer said as they sat in a comfortable sitting room overlooking the grounds. Even after everything that happened, even during the most difficult periods of her life, she always found peace here. I think that's why it felt right to lay her to rest on the island. It's where she was happiest as a child. He shared stories about Diana's childhood that Harry had never heard, tales of a spirited young girl who loved to swim in the lake during summer visits, who knew every tree and path on the estate, who had dreamed of someday bringing her own children here to experience the same freedom she had felt. As they finished their tea and prepared to walk to the memorial garden, Earl Spencer handed Meghan a small key. "This opens the gate to the bridge," he explained. "Diana always said that anyone who truly loved her sons would understand the responsibility that came with this key. I think she would want you to have it." The significance of the gesture was not lost on any of them. This key represented more than physical access to Diana's resting place. It symbolized acceptance into the family, recognition of Meghan's role as someone who would help carry Diana's legacy forward through her love for Harry and their children. With the flowers in Meghan's hands and the key safely in her pocket, they began the walk through the wooded path toward the lake. Each step brought them closer to the moment that would change Meghan's understanding of her place in Harry's life forever, the moment when she would finally stand before the woman whose love had shaped the man she married. The anticipation was almost overwhelming as they approached the memorial garden, but Meghan felt ready. She had spent days preparing not just practically, but emotionally, opening her heart to receive whatever this experience would bring. As they reached the edge of the lake and saw the small island in the distance, she knew that everything in their relationship had led to this moment of sacred introduction. The first sight of the lake took Meghan's breath away. The morning mist still clung to the water's surface, creating an ethereal atmosphere that made the small island appear to float like something from a fairy tale. Ancient willow trees draped their branches toward the water, their leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze, while waterfowl glided silently across the lake's surface as if they understood the sacred nature of this place. Harry stopped at the water's edge, his hand finding Meghan's as they stood together, taking in the peaceful scene. The island itself was larger than she had imagined, perhaps 50 feet across, covered with mature trees and flowering shrubs that created a natural cathedral around Diana's final resting place. A simple stone bridge, elegant in its understated design, stretched across the narrowest part of the lake, leading to the island's single entrance. "This is it," Harry said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of reverence and barely contained emotion. "This is where she rests." Meghan could feel the significance of the moment settling into her bones. Standing here, looking across the water at the place where Princess Diana had been laid to rest, she finally understood why Harry spoke of his mother with such immediate presence. This wasn't a traditional cemetery where death felt final and distant. This was a living memorial, a place where Diana's spirit seemed to inhabit every tree, every flower, every ripple on the water's surface. They walked slowly toward the bridge, their footsteps echoing softly on the stone path. Harry explained that the bridge had been designed to create a sense of transition, a physical journey that represented the emotional passage between the everyday world and this sacred space. As they stepped onto the bridge, Meghan felt that transition immediately, as if they were crossing not just water, but time itself. The closer they got to the island, the more Meghan could see of the memorial garden that surrounded Diana's grave. White roses bloomed in carefully tended beds, their petals scattered by the morning breeze like nature's own tribute. Forget-me-nots carpeted the ground beneath larger flowering trees, creating a tapestry of blue and white that seemed to glow in the filtered sunlight. At the center of the island stood a simple white marble memorial, elegant in its restraint, bearing only Diana's name and the dates of her birth and death. No titles, no grand declarations, just the essential facts of a life that had touched millions. The simplicity was perfect, Meghan realized, reflecting the authentic, down-to-earth nature that had made Diana so beloved. As they stepped off the bridge onto the island itself, Harry's pace slowed even further. Meghan could see the weight of memory and emotion settling over him like a physical presence. This was clearly a deeply personal ritual for him, one that required careful attention to his own emotional needs, as well as respect for the sacred nature of the place. "I usually start by just sitting quietly for a few minutes," Harry said, gesturing toward a simple stone bench position to face the memorial while still providing a view of the lake beyond. "It helps me transition from whatever's been occupying my mind to being fully present here with her." They sat together in comfortable silence, Meghan following Harry's lead in simply absorbing the peaceful atmosphere of the place. The sounds of the outside world seemed muted here, replaced by the gentle lapping of water against the island's shore, the whisper of wind through leaves, and the occasional call of birds that nested in the surrounding trees. As the minutes passed, Meghan found herself thinking about all the stories Harry had shared about his mother, and how this peaceful place seemed to embody everything she had learned about Diana's character. The natural beauty spoke to her love of simple pleasures, while the privacy and protection reflected her desire for authentic relationships away from public scrutiny. When Harry finally stood and approached the memorial, Meghan remained on the bench, understanding instinctively that he needed a few moments alone with his mother before including her in the conversation. She watched as he placed his flowers at the base of the marble stone, his movements careful and reverent, before sitting on the ground beside the memorial in a gesture that seemed both formal and intimately familiar. Meghan couldn't hear the words Harry spoke to his mother, but she could see the emotion in his posture, the way his shoulders relaxed as he began to speak, as if Diana's presence was providing comfort even in death. She had witnessed Harry's private conversations with Diana's memory before, those moments when he would seek her guidance during difficult decisions. But seeing him here in this sacred place gave those conversations new depth and meaning. After what felt like an appropriate time, Harry gestured for Meghan to join him at the memorial. As she approached with her own carefully chosen flowers, her heart began beating faster. This was the moment she had been preparing for emotionally, the chance to finally introduce herself to the woman whose influence had shaped every aspect of the man she loved. Standing before Diana's memorial, Meghan felt an unexpected rush of emotion that surprised her with its intensity. Looking at the simple inscription of Diana's name, she was suddenly overwhelmed by the reality that this remarkable woman, whose stories had filled their home with laughter and love, was truly gone. The finality of death hit her in a way that years of hearing about Diana had not prepared her for. "Hello," Meghan whispered, her voice catching slightly as she placed her bouquet of white roses and forget-me-nots beside Harry's flowers. "I'm Meghan. I'm the one who gets to love your son now." The simple words carried the weight of everything she wanted to say. How Harry's love had changed her life completely. How his kindness and compassion were clearly gifts from his mother's influence. How she promised to honor the values Diana had instilled in him. How she would protect his heart the way Diana would have wanted, support his dreams the way Diana had always done, and love him with the same fierce devotion that had characterized Diana's own motherhood. Harry took her hand as she spoke, and Meghan could feel his gratitude for her presence here, his appreciation for the way she was handling this sacred introduction. They stood together in front of the memorial, two people united in their love for Diana's son, separated by life and death, but connected through the unbreakable bond of that shared love. "I want you to know that he talks about you every day," Meghan continued, her voice gaining strength as the words flowed more naturally. "He carries your love with him everywhere he goes. The way he fathers our children, the way he treats people with kindness regardless of their circumstances, the way he fights for causes that matter even when it's difficult. All of that comes from you." As she spoke, Meghan felt a strange sense of peace settling over her, as if her words were being heard and accepted. The morning mist had lifted completely now, allowing warm sunlight to filter through the trees and illuminate the memorial garden with a golden glow that seemed almost supernatural in its beauty. Harry began to share stories about their life together, telling his mother about Archie's first steps, about their home in California, about the work they were doing with their foundation. His voice was conversational, natural, as if Diana were sitting with them rather than resting beneath the marble stone. Meghan realized that for Harry, this wasn't about speaking to the dead. This was about maintaining a living relationship with his mother's memory and influence. She would have adored Archie, Harry said, turning to look at Meghan with eyes bright with both joy and sadness. Can you imagine her as a grandmother? She would have spoiled him completely, taught him to get into all sorts of harmless trouble, made sure he knew he was loved beyond measure. Meghan could indeed imagine Diana as a grandmother, based on all the stories she had heard about Diana's relationship with Harry and William. She would have been the kind of grandmother who got down on the floor to play, who remembered every milestone and celebrated every small victory, who provided unconditional love and endless encouragement. They spent nearly an hour at the memorial, sharing stories, expressing gratitude, and simply being present in that sacred space. Meghan found herself telling Diana about their wedding day, about the moments when she had felt Harry's mother's presence most strongly, about the ways Diana's influence had shaped their relationship from the very beginning. As they prepared to leave, Meghan felt a profound shift in her understanding of her place in Harry's life. She had always known that Diana was important to him, but being here, having this conversation, she finally comprehended the true depth of that connection. Diana wasn't just a memory for Harry. She was an active presence in his daily life, a source of guidance and strength that would continue to influence his decisions and relationships forever. The walk back across the bridge felt different than their arrival. They moved more slowly, reluctant to leave the peaceful sanctuary of the island, but also carrying with them a sense of completion and blessing. Meghan felt as though she had received Diana's approval, not through any supernatural experience, but through the simple act of loving Harry enough to make this pilgrimage, to honor his mother's memory, and to promise to continue the legacy of love that Diana had begun. As they reached the other side of the lake and turned for one last look at the island, Harry squeezed Meghan's hand tightly. "Thank you," he said simply, but Meghan could hear the depth of gratitude in those two words. This visit had been important for him in ways she was still beginning to understand, and her presence had made it even more meaningful than his previous solitary pilgrimages. The sacred encounter was complete, but Meghan knew its effects would continue to resonate in their relationship for years to come. She had finally met Diana in the only way that was possible now, and the meeting had changed something fundamental in how she understood her role as Harry's wife and the mother of his children. The walk back through the memorial garden felt like emerging from a dream into reality, though the peace and clarity Meghan had found at Diana's grave remained with her like a warm embrace. The dappled sunlight filtering through the ancient trees seemed brighter somehow, as if the world itself had been transformed by the sacred conversation they had just experienced. Harry moved beside her with a lighter step than she had seen in months, his usual purposeful stride replaced by something more relaxed and contemplative. Every few steps, he would pause to point out details about the grounds that he remembered from childhood visits when his mother was still alive. The particular tree where Diana had loved to sit and read, the bend in the path where she would stop to feed the ducks, the flower bed she had helped design during the memorial garden's creation. She always said this place held the best parts of her childhood. Harry shared as they paused beside a magnificent oak tree whose trunk was so wide it would take 3 people holding hands to encircle it. She told me once that when she was feeling overwhelmed by royal obligations or media pressure, she would close her eyes and picture herself here as a little girl, completely free to be exactly who she was without any expectations or judgment. Meghan touched the rough bark of the ancient oak, trying to imagine a young Diana, finding solace in its shade decades earlier. The continuity of the place struck her profoundly. This tree had been here for centuries before Diana was born, had watched over her childhood summers, and now provided shelter for her final rest. There was something deeply comforting about that permanence, that connection to something larger than any individual life. As they continued walking toward the main house, where Earl Spencer was waiting with tea and lunch, Meghan found herself processing the intense emotions of their visit to Diana's grave. The experience had been more powerful than she had anticipated, creating a sense of connection not just to Harry's mother, but to something larger about love, loss, and the ways relationships continue beyond death. "I understand now why you never speak about her in the past tense," Meghan said as they walked. Being there, talking to her, it felt like she was listening, not in a supernatural way, but like her love for you is so strong that it continues to exist independently, like an energy that can't be destroyed. Harry nodded, his eyes bright with the recognition that Meghan truly understood what he had been trying to explain for years. Most people who heard him talk about his ongoing relationship with his mother's memory assumed it was simply denial or wishful thinking. But Meghan had felt Diana's presence too, had experienced that sense of continuing connection that transcended physical death. When they reached the main house, Earl Spencer welcomed them into his private study, a cozy room lined with books and family photographs that provided an intimate contrast to the grand public rooms of Althorp. Over lunch, he shared more stories about Diana's childhood, filling in details that helped Meghan understand the foundation of confidence and independence that had allowed Diana to navigate the challenges of royal life. She was always determined to make her own choices, Earl Spencer recalled with a fond smile. Even as a little girl, she had this incredible sense of right and wrong, this instinct for fairness that she never lost. When she became Princess of Wales, she didn't change to fit the role. She changed the role to fit her values. The conversation turned to Diana's later years, the period after her divorce when she had been free to pursue her charitable work without the constraints of formal royal protocol. Earl Spencer described visits from Diana during this time, how she had seemed to glow with purpose and satisfaction as she threw herself into causes that mattered to her: landmine clearance, AIDS awareness, supporting homeless youth. She was happier in those final years than she had been in a long time, Earl Spencer continued. She felt like she had finally found her true calling, using her platform to make a real difference rather than just cutting ribbons and making polite conversation. She talked often about wanting to leave a legacy that mattered, something that would outlast the headlines and the glamour. Meghan listened intently, understanding for the first time the full scope of what Diana had been trying to accomplish in her too short life. The woman she had just met at the grave wasn't just Harry's mother or a former princess. She was someone who had used her unique position to champion causes that others ignored, someone who had transformed the very idea of what royal service could look like. After lunch, Earl Spencer offered to show them the memorial temple that had been built on the estate to allow public visitors to pay their respects to Diana without disturbing the privacy of her actual burial site. The temple was a beautiful classical structure surrounded by gardens, filled with photographs documenting Diana's charitable work and the impact she had made around the world. Walking through the temple's exhibition, Meghan saw Diana's legacy from a new perspective. She had always known that Diana was beloved, but seeing the scope of her humanitarian work, reading testimonials from people whose lives she had touched, understanding the global nature of her influence, gave Meghan a deeper appreciation for the responsibility that came with continuing that legacy. "This is what she really cared about," Harry said as they stood before a display of photographs showing Diana with AIDS patients, landmine survivors, homeless individuals, and sick children. The royal duties were something she accepted as part of her position, but this was her passion. She believed that compassion could change the world if enough people were willing to act on it. As they prepared to leave Althorp later that afternoon, Earl Spencer walked them to their car, clearly moved by the visit and by Meghan's respectful approach to honoring Diana's memory. Before saying goodbye, he handed Meghan a small wrapped package, explaining that it was something Diana had treasured that he wanted her to have. Inside was a simple silver bracelet that had belonged to Diana, nothing elaborate or particularly valuable, but something she had worn regularly during her final years. The gesture overwhelmed Meghan with its significance. This wasn't just a piece of jewelry, but a tangible connection to the woman whose love had shaped the man she married. The drive home was filled with comfortable conversation as they processed the day's experiences together. Harry seemed more at peace than Meghan had seen him in months, as if sharing this sacred ritual with her had healed something in his relationship with his mother's memory that he hadn't even realized needed healing. "I've been carrying this guilt," Harry admitted as they drove through the countryside toward home. Guilt about being happy when she couldn't be here to see it, guilt about moving forward with our life while her story ended so tragically. But today, talking to her with you there, I finally felt like she was giving me permission to be happy without feeling like I was leaving her behind. Meghan understood exactly what he meant. Survivor's guilt was a complex emotion that affected many people who lost loved ones unexpectedly. And Harry's case was complicated by the public nature of his life and the way Diana's death had been analyzed and discussed by the entire world. But today's visit had provided a different narrative, one where Diana's love was strong enough to want happiness for her son, even if she couldn't be there to witness it. That evening, as they sat in their garden at home with Archie playing nearby, they called William and Kate to share the experience of their visit to Althorpe. The conversation was warm and emotional, with William expressing his gratitude that Meghan had finally had the chance to visit their mother's resting place, and Kate sharing her own memories of the few times she had been there. "She would have loved seeing you two together there," William said, and Meghan could hear the sincerity in his voice. Despite all the complications that had arisen between the brothers over the years, their shared love for Diana remained a powerful connection that transcended their differences. As they prepared for bed that night, Meghan found herself looking at the silver bracelet Earl Spencer had given her, thinking about the woman who had worn it, the hands that had touched it, the life it had witnessed. She understood now that being part of Harry's family meant being part of Diana's story too, carrying forward the values and love that had shaped him into the man he had become. The visit to Diana's grave had changed something fundamental in Meghan's understanding of her place in this family. This legacy, this ongoing story of love and service and compassion. She felt honored to be included, humbled by the responsibility, and grateful for the chance to finally meet the woman whose son had changed her life completely. In the months and years that followed, Meghan would return to the memory of that morning at Althorpe whenever she needed guidance or strength. The conversation she had had with Diana by that peaceful lake had established a relationship that would continue to influence her choices as a wife, mother, and advocate for causes that mattered. Diana's legacy lived on not just in the charitable foundations that bore her name or the public memorials that honored her work, but in the daily choices made by the people who loved her son, the grandchildren who would grow up hearing her stories, and the ongoing commitment to the values she had held dear. The visit to her grave had been just the beginning of Meghan's deeper relationship with Diana's memory and influence. In the weeks following their visit to Althorpe, Meghan noticed profound changes in both herself and Harry that seemed to radiate outward into every aspect of their lives. The sacred encounter at Diana's grave had created a shift in their relationship that was difficult to articulate, but impossible to ignore. It was as if they had crossed an invisible threshold together, moving from a marriage that honored Diana's memory to one that actively carried her legacy forward. Harry spoke more freely about his mother now, sharing stories without the underlying sadness that had always tinged his reminiscences. The guilt he had carried about finding happiness while Diana remained absent began to dissolve, replaced by a growing conviction that his joy was exactly what she would have wanted for him. During their daily walks together, He would point out flowers that reminded him of Diana's garden preferences or share memories sparked by particular songs or scents. But these moments felt celebratory rather than melancholy. The change in Harry was most evident in how he approached his role as a father. Where once he had seemed almost afraid of making mistakes that might disappoint Diana's memory, he now embraced parenting with the confidence of someone who had received his mother's blessing. Watching him play with Archie in their garden, teaching their son the same silly songs Diana had sung to him, Meghan could see the direct line of love connecting 3 generations. "I used to worry that I wouldn't know how to be a good father without her guidance," Harry confided one evening as they watched Archie sleep peacefully in his crib. "But after our visit to Althorpe, I realized she's been guiding me all along through everything she taught me during the years we had together. Her love doesn't need her physical presence to be effective." For Meghan, the transformation was equally profound but manifested differently. The silver bracelet that Earl Spencer had given her became a daily reminder of the woman whose influence shaped every aspect of her new family. She found herself unconsciously touching the bracelet during important moments, feeling connected to Diana's strength and wisdom in ways she had never anticipated. More significantly, Meghan began to understand her own role in continuing Diana's legacy through the choices she made as Harry's wife and partner. The charitable work they did together took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of Diana's passionate commitment to using privilege in service of others. The conversations they had about raising their children with awareness of their fortunate circumstances echoed the same values Diana had tried to instill in Harry and William. The visit to Diana's grave had also deepened Meghan's relationship with other members of Harry's family, particularly those who had known and loved Diana personally. Earl Spencer began including them in family gatherings at Althorpe, treating Meghan not as Harry's wife, but as someone who had been personally blessed by Diana's approval. These relationships provided Meghan with additional perspectives on Diana's character and influence that enriched her understanding of the woman she had never met but now felt deeply connected to. Even William and Kate seemed to view Meghan differently after a pilgrimage to their mother's resting place. The visit had demonstrated a level of respect and commitment to family unity that transcended the complicated dynamics that sometimes arose between the couples. When they gathered for family occasions, there was an unspoken acknowledgement that Meghan had undergone her own form of royal initiation, not through ceremony or protocol, but through love and genuine devotion to Diana's memory. The impact on their public work was perhaps the most visible change following their visit to Althorpe. The foundation they had established began focusing more specifically on causes that had been close to Diana's heart, particularly initiatives supporting mental health awareness and helping vulnerable youth. Meghan found herself drawn to projects that echoed Diana's hands-on approach to charity work, preferring direct engagement with the people they were trying to help rather than formal fundraising events. During a visit to a youth shelter in London, Meghan sat with a teenage girl who reminded her strongly of the stories Harry had shared about Diana's work with homeless young people. As she listened to the girl's struggles and hopes, Meghan felt Diana's presence in a way that was becoming familiar, not as a supernatural experience, but as an internal compass pointing toward compassion and authentic connection. "Your husband's mom used to come here," the girl mentioned casually during their conversation. "The staff still talk about her sometimes. They say she never acted like she was doing us a favor by visiting. She acted like we were doing her a favor by letting her listen to our stories." The comment stayed with Meghan long after they left the shelter, providing insight into Diana's approach to charitable work that influenced how she conducted her own public engagements. Instead of viewing their platform as something that allowed them to help others, she began to see it as something that provided them with opportunities to learn from people whose experiences differed from their own. This shift in perspective became evident in interviews and public statements where Meghan spoke about their charitable work. Rather than emphasizing what they were doing for others, she focused on what they were learning from the communities they served. The humility and authenticity of this approach resonated with both the media and the public, creating a warmth around their public image that had sometimes been missing in previous years. The anniversary of Diana's death, which fell a few months after their visit to Althorpe, provided an opportunity for Harry and Meghan to publicly honor her memory in a way that felt both personal and meaningful. Instead of the formal memorial events that had characterized previous anniversaries, they chose to spend the day volunteering at organizations that supported causes Diana had championed. They worked side by side at a food bank, served lunch at a homeless shelter, and spent the afternoon reading to children in a hospital ward. The day was covered by media, but the focus was on the work itself rather than any formal ceremonies or speeches. By the end of the day, they were exhausted but fulfilled, feeling that they had honored Diana's memory in exactly the way she would have wanted. That evening, as they sat together reflecting on the day, Harry shared a realization that had been growing since their visit to his mother's grave. "I think I finally understand what she meant when she said she wanted to be the queen of people's hearts," he said. "It wasn't about titles or recognition. It was about creating connections that mattered, relationships based on genuine care rather than obligation." The concept resonated deeply with Meghan, who had sometimes struggled with the performative aspects of royal duties during their time as working members of the royal family. Diana's approach to public service offered an alternative model that prioritized authentic engagement over formal protocol, meaningful impact over ceremonial appearances. As their son Archie grew older and their family expanded, the influence of Diana's parenting philosophy became even more evident in their choices. They made deliberate decisions to expose their children to diverse experiences, ensuring they understood both their privilege and their responsibility to use it wisely. The bedtime stories they told included tales of Diana's adventures around the world, her courage in challenging conventions, and her unwavering commitment to treating all people with dignity and respect. The silver bracelet that Meghan wore daily became a conversation starter when Archie was old enough to notice it, providing natural opportunities to tell him about the grandmother he would never meet, but whose love surrounded him every day. These conversations laid the foundation for a relationship with Diana's memory that would shape Archie's understanding of his heritage and his role in continuing the family's legacy of service. By the time their second child arrived, the integration of Diana's influence into their family life was complete and natural. The nursery included photographs of Diana with Harry and William as children, ensuring that their grandmother's presence would be part of their earliest memories. The values that guided their parenting decisions, the importance of empathy, the power of kindness, the responsibility that comes with privilege, all traced back to lessons Diana had taught Harry during their time together. The visit to Diana's grave had been intended as a single meaningful experience, but it had evolved into something much larger, a transformation of their entire approach to family, service, and legacy. What had begun as Meghan's desire to properly introduce herself to Harry's mother had become a foundation for a life deliberately shaped by Diana's example and values. Years later, when people asked Meghan about the most significant moments in her relationship with Harry, she would always mention their visit to Althorpe as a turning point. Not because of any dramatic revelation or supernatural experience, but because it had provided her with a deeper understanding of the love that had shaped the man she married and the responsibility she had accepted by becoming part of his family. The peaceful island where Diana rested continued to be a place of pilgrimage for their family, a sanctuary where they could reconnect with the values and love that anchored their life together. But more importantly, the spirit of that place, the peace, the love, the commitment to service had taken root in their daily lives, ensuring that Diana's legacy would continue to flourish through the choices made by the family who loved her son. In honoring Diana's memory through their words and actions, Harry and Meghan had discovered something precious, a way to keep love alive beyond death, to transform grief into purpose, and to ensure that the best aspects of a remarkable woman's character would continue to influence the world through the lives she had touched. The visit to Diana's grave had been the beginning of that transformation, but the real monument to her memory was the life they built together in service of the values she had held dear.